Overthinking is one of the most exhausting patterns an INFJ can fall into, because your mind is naturally built to go deep, read between the lines, and sense meaning where other people barely notice anything. Stopping overthinking isn't about shutting your mind down, but learning how to direct it, ground it, and get healthier pathways to follow. For INFJs, the solution isn't surface-level advice. You need methods that work with your psychology, not against it. A major step toward ending overthinking is understanding that INFJs process the world through patterns, intuition, and emotional undercurrents. You're not overthinking because you're weak or irrational. You're overthinking because your mind is wired to analyze connections, anticipate outcomes, and monitor harmony. What helps is shifting from unconscious spiraling to intentional reflection. If you can take control of when, where, and how your mind processes information, your thoughts stop becoming background noise and start becoming something you actively manage. One of the most powerful ways to do this is by scheduling designated processing time. INFJs overthink the most when they try to hold too much in their heads throughout the day. When you intentionally create time to reflect, whether in the morning, during a walk, or before bed, you train your mind to save analysis for that window. Over time, this reduces mental clutter because your brain learns that it doesn't have to constantly scan for meaning every second. If you want to truly understand yourself and unlock your full potential as an INFJ, check out the INFJ Purpose Compass today. The link is in the description of this video. Another way to end overthinking is to ground your thoughts in sensory reality. INFJs live largely in their inner world, which is rich, symbolic, and abstract. When your mind stays in that world for too long, it begins to build scenarios, assumptions, and entire emotional landscapes that don't necessarily match the physical world around you. Grounding techniques like touching a textured object, paying attention to your breathing, checking what's physically true in the moment, or focusing on something you can see, hear, or smell helps interrupt spirals by pulling you back to what is real, not imagined. It doesn't silence your intuition. It just keeps your imagination from running unchecked. One of the most subtle reasons INFJs overthink is the need to prevent conflict or emotional fallout. You replay conversations, plan responses, analyze people's tone, and worry about meanings hidden between words because you want to avoid misunderstanding and protect harmony. What helps is accepting that you cannot control all outcomes. This sounds simple, but for an INFJ, letting go is a discipline. It involves training yourself to stop trying to read every micro-expression or pre-solve every emotional problem for people. Instead, practice responding to others based on what they explicitly say, not what you fear they might feel. When you learn to trust direct communication more than imagined interpretations, your mind relaxes because it's no longer carrying the burden of predicting everything. Another INFJ issue is perfectionism. You want things to make sense. You want them to align with your values. You want to avoid mistakes that could hurt someone or derail something important. Perfectionism tricks you into believing that if you just think a little harder or analyze a little longer, you'll find the flawless solution. In reality, overthinking becomes the thing that slows you down and clouds your intuition. A powerful way to break this cycle is to give yourself permission to act before you feel completely ready. INFJs often underestimate how wise they already are. When you start taking action sooner, you prove to your brain that you don't need endless preparation to make good decisions. Each time you take a step based on reasonable clarity rather than total certainty, you weaken the perfectionistic reflex that fuels overthinking. Something else INFJs rarely consider is how much hidden emotional information they hold on to. Because you're highly empathetic, you absorb moods, tensions, and unspoken feelings from people around you. Your mind then tries to make sense of all that emotional data, which leads to spiraling. Emotional detachment doesn't mean becoming cold. It means creating boundaries between what you feel and what others feel. Simple internal reminders like, "This emotion is not mine," or "I'm sensing it, not responsible for it," helps separate intuition from emotional overload. When you stop carrying emotional weight that doesn't belong to you, your mind becomes drastically lighter. INFJs also overthink when their environment is chaotic or overstimulating. You function best when your surroundings are calm and controlled because your inner world is already intense. A messy room, loud environment, or unpredictable schedule can amplify mental noise without you realizing why. Creating an INFJ-friendly environment, clean spaces, minimal clutter, soothing colors, quiet pockets, or playlists that calm your mind, gives your brain fewer external triggers. Your mind intuitively settles when your space feels stable. It's also important for INFJs to express themselves in ways that externalize thoughts rather than trapping them internally. Journaling, voice notes, long conversations with someone you trust, or creatively expressing emotions through art or writing can serve as a release valve. When INFJs don't express what they're thinking, their inner world becomes congested. Writing or speaking your thoughts gets them out of your head and turns them into something you can observe objectively instead of something that consumes you. The clarity that comes from externalizing your thoughts often dissolves overthinking before it can spiral. Another powerful shift is understanding the difference between intuition and anxiety. INFJs often confuse the two because both feel internal and emotional. Intuition is quiet, steady, and calm. It feels like a soft nudge. Anxiety is loud, repetitive, and urgent. When you learn to identify which voice you're hearing, overthinking dramatically decreases. If a thought feels frantic, repetitive, or fear-driven, it's not intuition, it's anxiety. Reminding yourself of this difference helps you stop giving anxious thoughts the authority they don't deserve. INFJs also need meaningful solitude to reset mentally and emotionally. You recharge by withdrawing from noise, expectations, and emotional energy so your mind can return to clarity. Solitude is not isolation, it is recalibration. When an INFJ goes too long without time alone, overthinking intensifies because your intuition becomes clouded by external impressions. Even short moments of solitude, like sitting quietly, walking alone, or shutting your door for a few minutes, help your mind sort through emotions more cleanly. One of the most overlooked ways to stop INFJ overthinking is learning to interrupt the spiral early. Most INFJs only try to break the cycle once they're already deep into it. A more effective approach is to catch the earliest signs: a tightening in your chest, a flood of what-ifs, replaying the same scenario twice, or feeling mentally restless. As soon as you notice the first spark, you intervene immediately. Take a breath, change your environment, shift your focus, or ground yourself. Breaking the cycle early prevents the avalanche of thoughts that comes later. INFJs stop overthinking when they build trust in themselves, in their intuition, in their resilience, and in the fact that not everything requires analysis. You do not need to interpret every silence, predict every outcome, or make sense of every emotion before it happens. The more you trust yourself, the less your mind needs to keep scanning for danger or deeper meaning. Confidence calms the INFJ mind. Trust turns down the internal volume. And self-assurance helps you recognize that your intuition works best when you give it space, not pressure. Ending overthinking as an INFJ is not about becoming someone else. It's about learning how to work with your mind instead of fighting it. When you channel your intuition intentionally, ground yourself in reality, set emotional boundaries, accept imperfection, externalize your thoughts, and build trust in your inner wisdom, your mind becomes a tool, not a trap. You stop spiraling and start seeing clearly. You stop worrying and start understanding. And in that space, the INFJ's gifts finally shine without the weight of overthinking. Another powerful way INFJs can stop overthinking is by learning to slow down their intuition long enough to separate real insights from imagined threats. Your intuition works like a high-speed processor, picking up subtle cues, reading emotional shifts, detecting inconsistencies. But when you're stressed or overwhelmed, that intuitive speed becomes a source of anxiety instead of clarity. One of the most effective ways to manage this is by practicing intuitive pacing, which means intentionally slowing your internal interpretations instead of immediately believing the first meaning your mind creates. When you pause before drawing conclusions, your intuition becomes sharper, quieter, and more accurate. The pause gives you space to verify whether the pattern you sensed is real or simply your mind trying to fill emotional silence with imagined answers. Another overlooked INFJ habit that fuels overthinking is internal idealism. You don't just want things to go well. You want them to align with a deeper vision of how things should be. When reality doesn't match that vision, the INFJ mind reacts by trying to analyze, fix, or reinterpret the situation until it fits your ideal. A healthier approach is learning to allow good enough to exist without interpreting it as failure. Accepting that some things can be imperfect and still meaningful frees your mind from constantly trying to rewrite reality. Letting your idealism become inspiration instead of pressure is one of the most liberating shifts for an INFJ. You can also reduce overthinking by building a healthier relationship with uncertainty. INFJs struggle with not knowing, not because they fear curiosity, but because uncertainty creates emotional vulnerability. When you don't have all the answers, your mind tries to fill the gaps with assumptions, predictions, or hypothetical scenarios. What helps is learning to reinterpret uncertainty not as danger, but as open space, a place where possibilities can exist without needing to be controlled. Practicing emotional patience helps train your mind to wait for clarity instead of forcing it. You stop rushing toward conclusions and start giving situations room to reveal themselves naturally. Another cause of INFJ overthinking is emotional memory. You can feel past experiences as if they're still happening, especially moments where you felt misunderstood, rejected, or blindsided. Your mind replays those memories to prevent them from ever happening again, but this creates a cycle where old pain influences new situations. Breaking this pattern involves learning to recognize when your mind is reacting to the past instead of the present. When you notice emotional déjà vu, gently remind yourself that this moment is not the same moment, and this person is not the same person. Separating present reality from past wounds helps stop spirals before they start. INFJs also overthink when they are emotionally underfed. When you go too long without meaningful connection, heartfelt conversations, or spiritual nourishment, your mind tries to create depth internally because it's not receiving enough externally. This inner craving leads to mental loops, introspection overload, and emotional overanalysis. Filling your emotional tank through deep conversations, creative expression, spiritual reflection, or time with someone who truly understands you reduces overthinking because your mind no longer has to compensate for emotional emptiness. When an INFJ feels nourished, the mental noise decreases naturally. Another vital shift is learning how to close emotional tabs in your mind. INFJs tend to keep unresolved thoughts open like browser tabs, returning to them over and over because they don't feel emotionally complete. You overthink not because you want to, but because your mind refuses to move on until it feels the situation has reached meaning, closure, or harmony. Practicing emotional closure, even internally, helps break this loop. Sometimes closure doesn't come from conversations or solutions. It comes from accepting that you understand enough to move forward. When you can internally decide, this chapter is closed, your mind stops reopening it. INFJs also need to learn how to let people reveal themselves instead of trying to figure them out prematurely. Your intuition is strong, but it can become overactive when you try to decode someone's intentions too quickly. Allowing people to show you who they are through consistent actions instead of intuition-driven prediction reduces unnecessary analysis. When you observe instead of interpret, your thoughts become simpler, calmer, and grounded in facts rather than possibilities. Another solution is creating energetic boundaries. Because you absorb emotional energy without realizing it, your thoughts get tangled with other people's moods, intentions, and anxieties. Overthinking is often your mind trying to sort out which emotions belong to you and which do not. Setting energetic boundaries through visualization, intention setting, or even simple habits like mentally releasing emotional tension at the end of the day helps prevent emotional overload from turning into mental spiraling. When your energy is protected, your thoughts stay clearer and softer. The INFJ mind also stabilizes when you give yourself permission to be misunderstood. Overthinking often comes from the fear that someone misread your intentions or that you didn't express yourself perfectly. But perfection in communication is impossible, and expecting it keeps your mind trapped in infinite rewrites of conversations. When you accept that misunderstanding is part of human interaction, your mind loosens its grip on the need to rehearse or replay every interaction. The peace that comes from letting go of perfect clarity is profound. INFJs should learn to anchor themselves in purpose. When you're disconnected from your sense of meaning, your mind fills the void with analysis, worry, and mental noise. But when you feel aligned with your purpose, whether through creativity, service, spirituality, or personal growth, your energy flows outward instead of inward. Purpose organizes your intuition, quiets your doubts, and gives your mind a direction. Overthinking fades naturally when you're focused on something that matters deeply to you.